Thank you all for being here tonight. We're really excited to introduce you to our project. My name's Maddie. I am one of the graduate student researchers here at Community Speak and the project coordinator. And I just want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank the Urban and Social Policy Concentration, as well as the management and US specializations for sponsoring this project with us tonight. As you all know, as we all know, New York City, as well as the rest of the country and the rest of the world, are still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. And as the New York City government begins to design and implement policy in order to address the social, economic, and health impacts of the pandemic, it's really crucial that they use data in order to ensure that their resources and programs are being targeted towards the highest need communities in the most effective and efficient manner. So Community Speak partners with community-based organizations in order to collect and analyze survey data and to design, in order to identify vulnerable communities, assess needs, and assist local governments and the New York City government in targeted policy interventions. And our framework is being expanded and adapted to other cities and can be adapted to cities around the world and local governments around the world. And so with that, our very first policy brief, which we're so excited to present, focuses on families with children in New York City. And we're going to present some of our findings as well as some of our recommendations with you tonight. I'd like to welcome Stephanie Fox, our partnerships coordinator, to share some of the data with you.
Hello, as Maddie said, my name is Stephanie Fox. I'm the partnerships coordinator here at Community Speak, and I'm going to talk through some of the key data points in our policy brief. By working with our partners, both community-based organizations and borough presidents, Community Speak's most recent survey was able to reach families with children across New York City. And these families reported unique challenges, particularly related to childcare. Families in our city are struggling to access childcare when they need it. 36% of all respondents reported that they could not find childcare when they needed it. In the Bronx, 60% of respondents reported difficulties finding childcare. While every group across the city reported difficulties both finding and affording childcare, these challenges were experienced disproportionately by Black and Hispanic families. While 15% of white respondents reported childcare challenges, about 40% of Black, Asian, and Hispanic respondents reported difficulties affording childcare. Half of Hispanic respondents reported difficulty finding childcare when they needed it. Although 56% of Black families with children in the survey were at or above the median income at $60,000, they still struggled disproportionately to find and afford childcare. It is clear that childcare poses a serious problem for families in our city, but the data also reveals cascading impacts stemming from these challenges. Families with children were more likely to experience food insecurity. Compared to families without children, they were more likely to worry about food running out and twice as likely to report that food had in fact run out. Black and Hispanic households were 5 times more likely to experience food insecurity as white families. Families with children were also more likely to report difficulty paying bills and difficulty paying rent than households without children. While 39% of families with children had difficulty paying bills, over half of Hispanic households reported this experience. Without access to childcare, families are less able to work and provide for the basic needs of their household. If the city expects its economy to recover, it must focus on these families first. Please keep this data in mind as you listen to our discussion this evening. I'm pleased to introduce Professor Esther Fuchs, Professor of International and Public Affairs and Political Science here at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, and a Community Speak Principal Investigator. She will now moderate our panel discussion.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Steph, and thank you, Maddie, for opening up our event. This is the first in-person event I've been to in this space in 2 years. I am really excited to see everybody, and I am really happy to be here. And I can't think of a more important topic for us to be talking about today. And I just want to do a couple of quick thank yous and then get right into our program. First of all, I want to thank my faculty co-conspirators, Sarah Holloway, Bob Shapiro, Mayor Nutter, and Nomi El Haddad, who are all principal investigators on the Community Speaks project. And I want to thank Kevin, our erstwhile wonderful person without whom we would get nothing done in the Urban and Social Policy Program at SEPA. And I have to thank Ashley McQuarrie. Ashley is the project director. We haven't really found the right title for her because she kind of does everything while she's finishing up her PhD at Teachers College. And then I just want to thank the entire team from Community Speaks. I'm going to do something I never do. I'm just going to quickly go through everybody's name because everybody works so hard and it's just the right thing to do. Caitlin, Stephanie, Maddie, Kelsey, Avanti, Giovanna, Ariel, Saret, Lily, Sherry, Samia, and Ananya. Thank you, thank you. To do a really special thank you to Ryan Pierce, who's joining us this evening from Bloomberg Philanthropy. Ryan, I don't know if it's, actual temerity or if it was just naivete, but Ryan had the chutzpah to actually decide he would work with me on a project at Bloomberg Philanthropy. No one else seems to have been able to manage it. You're the first one. And, we brought it home. So we will be bringing Community Speak to several cities around the country. And I can't thank Ryan enough for all the hard work he put in really shepherding this proposal through. Thank you, Ryan. Heard from Maddie and Steph. Community Speak chose to focus its first policy brief on the impact of the pandemic on New York's families with children. This isn't an accident that we chose this group to focus on within our data. And I won't say all the things I want to say now because we have an extraordinary group of panelists this evening who will focus not only on the challenges of families and children and what they're facing to get their families through these difficult times, but they'll also discuss what the Adams administration needs to do with the $4 billion for daycare coming to the city from the state budget. This is really a challenge. And tonight we really expect not to just talk about the problem, but to do what my former boss, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, said, focus on the solutions as well, because there are solutions and we need to be making sure that with the money coming down the pike from the state, that we really use it wisely. The need is great, as the data indicates, and we have to make sure that the resources are targeted to the need. Now, I really was hoping we were going to have, little flyers out there with everybody's long bio, but we don't have that. And this is just a group of extraordinary people. And I know I can't do justice to everybody's bio, but I really want to briefly introduce the panelists. I'm just personally, I'm really so excited to have you all with us this evening. And I just can't tell you how much it means to all of us here at Columbia, to the students and myself, that you're going to share your expertise, your knowledge, and your experience with us. First, Jeff Canada. I don't know, everybody knows Jeff, but I'll just say he is one of the leading advocates for children and an innovator in the field of education, not just in the nation, but I'll go out on a limb and say the world. And I don't know, it just doesn't even begin to cover everything that you've done. Jeff grew up in the South Bronx. He earned his bachelor's degree at Bowdoin, and he eventually went and earned a master's at Harvard. And then, as everybody knows, he chose to come back to New York to start the Harlem Children's Zone in Harlem and to serve families like his own family in a way that he thought would not just raise people out of poverty, but really create opportunity. There's a big difference. And he wanted to do it through education, and that's what he's done, and more so. And I'll let him talk about the work of the Harlem Children's Zone. But I will say, if you haven't seen Waiting for Superman, you really must see it. The documentary features Jeff, and frankly, it would have been pretty boring and not interesting if it wasn't for you in it. And I just have to say a personal thank you. You don't always get to do that, but I will do that. Many years ago, it is many years, I was fortunate to be working on the reorganization of after school in the city of New York. And it was a highly successful initiative, and frankly would not have happened without Jeff, because not only did Jeff bring his expertise as a co-chair of the task force to make sure that quality was brought in, but he pretty much saved me from a lot of bad stuff. He really did. So, thank you for coming this evening. And I just had to say that. I don't ever say that in public, but why not? And Frances Lucerna, it's so crazy that I'm only meeting Frances this evening for the first time, because I really do know her. And I know her husband, Louis Gardner Costa, and they founded El Puente together. El Puente is also a storied organization in Williamsburg, now working in Puerto Rico. And Frances's commitment to teaching and learning and a holistic approach to education is unique, or it was unique. Now it's being also adopted by schools all over the world. And you'll be telling the story of El Puente this evening, I hope, as part of your remarks, because it's an extraordinary place as well, an extraordinary part of New York City. And next to Frances, well, sometimes you have to invite new people to the party, right? And I feel like so happy that Christina Hansen came on board. She's the executive director of POTS. POTS stands for Part of the Solution. And she too is extraordinary, young and extraordinary. So we need you a lot. You just understand that, because some of us are not going to be here forever, although I'm planning on it. And she works primarily in the South Bronx, and before she came to POTS, she worked in the Peace Corps in Senegal and for Shore Bank. And it just shows you that the world is small, because one of my mentors at the University of Chicago was a founder of Shore Bank, which is proud. And I really want all of us to hear more about the work that she's doing in the South Bronx. And finally, last but not least, of course, Mayor Michael Nutter. Everybody knows Mayor Nutter served as mayor of Philadelphia for 2 terms. He was term limited out, and we grabbed him to come up to Columbia to be the first occupant of the Dinkins chair at SEPA. And God, are we lucky to have him here. One thing I'll tell you about Mayor Nutter that you might not know, that he served for 15 years in the Philadelphia City Council. You deserve really a medal for that. Anybody who can serve in a city council, this is not an easy task. Much easier to be mayor, I think. And when the work that Mayor Nutter did in Philadelphia, I expect him to talk about that, but also about the work he's doing now, because he is continuing to engage in public policy, in government, and in civic life, while he's teaching at SEPA and involved in many other institutions. So I did what I promised I wasn't going to do, which was give long introductions, but I really feel like it was worth it, don't you? And we're going to start our panel discussion now, and I'm going to address the first question to Jeff Canada. And I'm going to sit down. So Jeff, this is a softball question for you, but you know, the answer is not so easy. As I said, you know, you were the founder of Harlem Children's Zone, and you've been working to lift Black and Hispanic children and families out of poverty for decades. And I'd really like you to talk about the work you've been doing in Harlem and around the country, because people may know that President Barack Obama took the Harlem Children's Zone model and created a national policy out of it. And could you focus a little bit on the added challenges that the pandemic has created for your families?
Thank you, Esther, and it's great to be here with everybody live. I'm really excited about it. So the work with the Harlem Children's Zone, it would be unfair for me to try to tell that story without saying that there were a group of us back in the 80s and 90s who were trying to actually create a youth movement. It wasn't just me, we were at Reglan at that time. It was Francis and Luis at Puente, Moises at Alianza Dominicana, John Best at Manhattan Valley. We all had the same sort of challenges. Both could we figure out the solutions in our community? We each were working in a different community. And could we solve the challenges that our communities were facing? So that early work, one of the first groups to go into schools. Francis will talk about that. We've known one another. I've known a lot of people over here for many decades. I'm not going to say how many, because Francis still looks just like when I saw her, like only 3 years ago when we first met. But there were a number of movements that started. You can't even talk about our work without talking about Mayor Dinkins. Richard Murphy, who created Beacon Schools, which was really trying to figure out how could you not just tackle the challenges in community, but bring them to scale. And you needed things like school buildings if you were going to try and bring things to scale. And we at the Harlem Children's Zone, we kept trying to answer the question, what are the most important levers if you're going to try to eliminate the kind of gaps between poor children and middle class and upper middle class children in this country? And the science kept changing on us. We started out thinking it was 5 to 12, and that's what we did. And we did 5 to 12, and we thought that was great. And then when people asked me how my kids were doing later on, they weren't doing so great. So we said, you know what, we got to get these kids through high school. And then we hit the 80s. We hit the crack epidemic. We hit the murders happening. We hit the destruction of the communities. We hit destruction of families. And we started thinking, no matter what we do with individual children, you cannot ignore the community that these kids are growing up in. Because if the community is so overwhelming that it undoes your good work, then our kids are going to fail. I wasn't the only one that did this. I know they were doing this at one day in Williamsburg. We began to think about, what does the science tell us? And the further the science became clear, because in the beginning, we didn't really know the early brain science about childhood development. We ended up saying that we had to start with kids at birth and stay with them until they graduated. Well, first we were just getting kids to college, and start from birth, getting kids to college, while we were trying to rebuild the communities around them, to change that community from one that gave the signal to children that really nobody cares about you. When you walk into a place, it's filled with trash. It's got like graffiti all over everywhere, abandoned cars, sort of abandoned buildings. A young person growing up in that community knows exactly what the adults think about their life chances. And I experienced that in the South Bronx growing up when it was falling down around us. And we all knew we weren't getting out of that place. It wasn't designed for regular, normal kids to make it out of an environment like that. And, you know, when people have always kind of challenged me around this issue about, you know, yes, some kids make it out. When a kid makes it out of somewhere and you have to celebrate it, that's a really bad sign about what we think about our children. And I just wanted to make it normal for kids in Harlem to have a safe life, to go to college and be successful. And so we start from birth, we stay with kids, started getting them in college. They weren't doing well when they got to college, but now getting them through college. And, you know, we started our work. I remember the first time we had folks come in to visit us. I had 40 kids on my board in college. Somebody looked at me and said, what's the big deal about that? I said, because it's a start. You know, 20 years later, we graduated more than 1,400 kids with college degrees, got more than 950 kids in college right now. This work is complicated. It takes time. It takes resources. And you have to have very high standards because our theory was every single one of our kids are going to college. And that's our goal. And if a kid is not doing that, then we're upset. Now, some folks have said, Jeff, what's wrong with trade schools? Nothing. Uniform services? Nothing. Nothing's wrong with those things, just not for my kids. Now, my kids are going to college. That's how I think about it. And I tell folks, a little controversial, so it's going to be my last controversial statement. When you're not quite sure of what to do, you should do what rich people do. That's what I say, right? And I don't think you'll go wrong. And I have to raise a lot of money, which means I have to know a lot of rich people. I tried raising money from poor people. That's another story. It didn't go so well. But this is what I found, and maybe here it'll be different. I have yet to meet someone of means who has a 5-year-old and is thinking they're doing anything but going to college. I just don't understand that. And when people were beating up on me for wanting my black and brown kids to go to college, we're on 125th Street. I can go 30 blocks and take you to a private school where the expectation is every single child, and no one's concerned about that. So for me, this idea of having high standards and holding yourself accountable, right? We hold ourselves accountable. When we fail, we correct it, but we're trying to really end generational poverty. We have 10,000 kids, working with 10,000 kids and 10,000 adults in our 97 blocks in Central Harlem. And we're trying to make sure that we eliminate all of the barriers that are under our control so our kids can reach their full potential. In most places that are poor in this country, poor kids, they just have so many obstacles to overcome. You can't talk about fairness. Now, I've been in the business a very long time, longer than I think anybody on this panel, maybe in this room. I will tell you, Esther, this is the worst set of challenges. I mean, went through the crack epidemic, it was a horror show. You know, that was really bad. Went through some years of some really terrible policing, that wasn't great. I've never seen a set of challenges, both on the emotional, on the academic, and on the safety side.
Yeah.
That's impacting all of our children at the same time. And poor children, it's right now, I will tell you, we don't know how bad it's going to be. We know it's worse than we've ever seen it, but we have not been able to actually catalog how bad it's going to be. And unless we do something different, it's going to be a generational challenge. We'll be talking about why these kids aren't making it 15 years from now, unless we do something extraordinary like that.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to just continue with the questions because we will get to some of the policy agenda that we have to engage with to deal with this kinds of issue. But Francis, I really want you to talk about El Puente and the work that you're doing there and the work you did with Lewis. And you know, tell us about what is happening now, what your approach has been and the challenges that you're facing now, the impact of virtual learning and the mental health impacts that Jeff was talking about and the academic impacts that you're dealing with the kids now. But first, tell us a little bit about El Puente.
Great. Thank you, Esther. It's great to be here tonight. I feel like, sitting next to Jeff, I feel like it's family, and hearing him speak and the moments in time that he has brought me back to, and the vanguard that we were on, that frontier that we were on in the 80s and in the 90s. My journey started a little bit before that. I'm grateful for the wonderful genes that I have, but I definitely, as I was saying earlier, I'm in that OG, space right now, right? That OG space. And I really didn't even know what OG meant until, someone said, and I said, gee, OG, what is that? Goat, what is that? What is that? But I guess, I want to first and foremost talk a little bit about sort of where I came to this work, right, into this awareness, and particularly in terms of what we're going to speak about tonight, childcare. In the early 70s, I had just graduated from Hunter College. I had a degree in education and dance. I was born and raised in Williamsburg, the daughter of a Puerto Rican mother and a Filipino father. You can only imagine, where did dance come from, right? But it says something about my spirit and also the community that raised me, Williamsburg. I was born and raised in Williamsburg and in Los Sudes, and was part of a church that was the citadel for liberation theology. And there it starts in terms of my understanding of my spirituality and its connection to social justice and in the pursuit of justice in my community. And that kind of was the beginnings of an awareness that brought me back to my community. And when I graduated from college, and my first job was in a early childhood, bilingual early childhood development center that was founded by leaders of the community and my mentors. And I worked in a 4-year-old class. And I would say, without a doubt, and I have said this for the decades that I've been doing this work, that the experience at Nuestros Niños Daycare Center was formative and transformative for my life. It was in that space and in that place, founded by people from the community, driven by the values and the vision of a community that really said they were going to take on the educational journey of their own children and open up an early childhood center. It was in that space where I really learned and experienced in a deep way what community education and the impact of community education could be, and the kind of impact and lasting impact it could really foster. In that classroom, parents from the community did not just come and drop their children. It was a place where they themselves felt a deep sense of ownership, support, and most importantly, empowerment. They were part of the journey of learning with their children, and they were welcomed into that space. They were part of the journey. They were part of the experience. I also learned, and it was the foundation for everything that I did later on, really the practice of culturally responsive education. Education that is deeply steeped in the culture of the people, the language of the people, the history of the people, the tradition of the people in their community, and how that was the context of the education and the development of their children in community. I also learned the depths of social emotional learning. What does it mean to create a loving and caring environment for young people, where they are the center of everything that happens there? That they come and they are known and they understand they are loved and they are cared for. And that was really, really the deep experience of that space. The other thing that I really experienced was the power of a community space like that, a learning space, a daycare center, early childhood center, in terms of its power to be a workforce development and an economic development engine for the community. I'll give you an example. I had a 14-year-old girl who worked with me in my 4-year-old class. From that experience, she became totally inspired to become a teacher. She went on to graduate with a degree in education. She came back, worked at Nuestros Niños, worked through the ranks, and became the director of Nuestros Niños, and just retired last year. That place, Nuestros Niños, which is now 50 years old, has supported, has inspired, and has given jobs to thousands of community residents, giving them a sense of passion, purpose, and their own power to really be able to change the lives of the children in that community. And I think also, when you really think about it, it really was a place where actually, there could be the possibility of those young people and those families, many of whom I still know and still work with through El Puente, that really have gone on to really become leaders and also workers and leaders in our community. What that did in that experience I stayed there, and then I went on to pursue my professional career in dance for the next 8 years, and then came back in 1980. And the circumstances that Jeff talked about is what we found in El Puente. It's what brought me to the table with Luis to really look at our community and say, this is not acceptable. 48 young people in 1980 were killed by violence in our small community of south side of Williamsburg. It was unacceptable. There was no infrastructure and support for families. It was the height of the Reagan administration and the cuts. The infrastructure buildings were blown out, burned down. Schools were the most ineffective, horrible, most violent schools in the city. Healthcare system was in disarray. And we said, not acceptable, not acceptable. And so what we did was we brought people together from the community. And this is a really important piece of what and how we have worked for the last 40 years. We brought the people of the community together. Because despite what you saw in that community, what was really powerful in that community were families that were invested and that was really clear about the fact that this was their home. And so we created a space and a place where people could come and bring their dreams and their aspirations and their vision for the community. We focused on young people because we were clear that we were creating a movement that would be focused on self-determination, our right to self-determination in our community, our right to take back the community, our right to lead the community, our right to build institutions within the community, much like what happened at Nuestros Niños in the 70s. And that's what we were aiming to do. But what we really understood was that we really were focused on how and in which way to create a safe and a empowering place for our young people to come who were most at risk, so that they could come and in the process of bringing their dreams and being able to engage in all of the kinds of holistic programs that we had, we were also clear that what we were telling them were that you have the power, the means, the talent to change what you want to change in this community. And so what we were clear is that they were going to be the engine and they were going to drive the change that we wanted to happen in our community. And what we were also very clear about was that we were focused on sustainable institution building. And that brings us to the El Puente Academy for Peace and Justice in 1993. We were clear that we had been working for 10 years, 11 years in an after-school setting, trying to remediate what was happening in schools. In 1993, because of an initiative called New Visions, a public and private venture with the city and the Department of Education, right? New Visions for Public Schools, there was an opportunity to create schools from the community, from collaboratives. And so we said we have a choice. We can continue to do it from outside, or we could go ahead and form or create our own school and make it a model for what we believed was quality education that was driven by community. And so what we did was we started the El Puente Academy for Peace and Justice. It was based on our mission to inspire and nurture leaders for peace and justice. It was guided by our 4 principles: creating community, loving, caring, mastery, and peace and justice. And it was, unbeknownst to us, the first public school in the United States that was focused on human rights. And it was also the first community school model in the country. It is now a movement, community schools. But what we were really able to do, and what we really pioneered at the Apuente Academy for Peace and Justice, were all of the things that we know now and fight for, that we understand is really about educational equity. Culturally responsive education, social emotional learning, project-based learning, portfolio assessment, civic engagement. All of the things that we see and we understand now are what is really at the heart of how and in which way we create educational equity. It was what we pioneered and opened up the frontier in 1993. I think that what I want to say about where we are right now is that, along with what Jeff said, I think the moment that we find ourselves in is unprecedented. We all know that. I think the depth of trauma for our young people, particularly our young people of color, our poor young people, our families, in our case, our undocumented, our immigrant families, is unimaginable. Where and how we are thinking about policy at this point should be really about how and in which way we can really focus on systemic change. It's this thing that we have always been committed to at El Puente. It's the frontiers that we opened up, whether that was educational reform, whether that was health and wellness, whether that was environmental justice or climate change. It is really focused on how and in which way we can disrupt the systems that have and continue to oppress our people, and how and in which way we can go ahead and create institutions and systems that really are about honoring the right to self-determination of our people and communities, and also give our communities the power to find their own solutions, but not only find their own solutions, but also implement those solutions. And I think this is the moment that we can really think about that in terms of the money that we have, the money that's coming into our communities, and the ways in which we can really kind of form policy. But I will say this, policies are just policies. The implementation is what matters. And if community is not at the table with decision-making, for implementation and assessment, monitoring the fact that this money is going to be used, these initiatives are going to support ultimately the empowerment of our communities of color, our young people and their families. And if in fact they do not open the way to real systemic change, then the policies mean nothing. And I think this is what we have seen, and this is the moment, because at this moment in time, we have the opportunity to create a new world and a new world order. And this is what we tell our young people all the time. This is the moment. Flip the narrative from what you are experiencing in terms of what may seem totally disempowering. Flip that narrative in terms of one that empowers you to understand that you have the power to make that change.
Thank you, Frances. I'm a little overwhelmed by your remarks because it's so powerful also, and there's so much to be done. And both of you have said, you know, we are in an unprecedented, difficult time now for children and families in our communities. And we all have to be engaged. This is a policy school, and we have to be engaged with community. We can't just sit here in our offices and in our classrooms and think about things. It doesn't work if you do it that way. And I think that's what we've heard both from Jeff and Frances. I want to give Christina a chance to speak now because she has been working in the Bronx, running an organization called POTS. Our survey has shown that Bronx families are really being disproportionately impacted by many of the post-COVID social and economic problems, especially childcare and of course, food insecurity. So, Christine, if you could tell us about the work of POTS and what you've been doing and the steps you've been taking as an organization working in the community to reduce food insecurity and focusing on any of the other issues related to the pandemic that you see as important.
Absolutely. So I often say that I think there was something in the water in the 1980s because there are all these amazing organizations in New York City that were founded then and continue to be the backbone of our city. I'd like to include POTS in that. It was also founded in the 1980s, and I am, I guess, a later generation who's come in and I'm grateful to be able to be here and build on the work of my predecessors. So POTS is a nonprofit. We serve about 35,000 people a year in the Bronx, and we offer a comprehensive and personalized approach to people who come to us with facing the challenges associated with both poverty and food insecurity. And so we do that through 3 pillars of services. We provide our dignity and wellness services. So those services provide for the really basic needs of some of our most vulnerable members of our community. So that includes showers, haircuts, a mailing address, and medical and dental services. We also have our food security services, and those services, our food pantry and our soup kitchen is our largest program. And that allows us to help our community with a steady source of nourishment, and was the service that we saw the greatest increase in size during the pandemic and continue to see to this day. And additionally, we have our long-term stability services. And so that's where we really get the opportunity to engage with our clients and find out what's going on in each and every one of their lives. Somebody coming to us for food or a shower or facing an eviction, it's never that that's the only problem. That problem doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so making sure we understand what are the frameworks of what's going on with you, what's happening in your family, what are the challenges that you're facing, and where is it that there are resources available that can help you address those challenges. Because in many cases, we are lucky in a city like New York City, in a state like New York, there are some resources available, but often people don't know how to access them and haven't had the opportunity to find them. And so how can we work with clients to find out what it is that will bring them to a little bit more stability economically and start thinking about what are those future goals and what are those dreams that I have for my family. And during the pandemic, as I mentioned, we saw an enormous increase. We've served over 70,000 people during the pandemic, and over the course of those 2 years, and over 4 million meals in our community, but also continued. We made the active decision that we had to stay open. POTS didn't close at all during the period of the pandemic. We did make some changes to the way we do provide services for safety and so on, but we saw instantly that if we weren't out there doing the work that we do, there were going to be a lot of people who are left behind. And so it was extraordinarily important to us to continue to be able to provide those services. We do a lot of work screening families, talking to them, hearing, what is your employment? What is your housing stability? What's going on? What are the things that are causing you to trip up? And so during this period, we also served about, in the last year, in 2021, we served about 12,000 children in 5,000 families, and we helped them access over $3 million in public benefits, 1.6 million meals, and we prevented 122 evictions in families with children. And there's a lot of data to show that homelessness, once a child experiences homelessness, that it's very difficult to handle a lot of the outcomes. And, after that, there are a lot of negative things. And one of the fortunate things about doing the work that we do directly, talking to clients, hearing from them, is both, that's a statistic. So 122 families, and we can hear, the educational outcomes of those families, that is worse. But we really can see why. And the why is people are stripped from the place that they live. They have to move somewhere else. That gets assigned by the city. They are allowed to continue going to their school, but the process of getting on the 3 subways to get back to the school that you had to go to, that's time consuming. And the requirements on the parents, once you're into the homeless shelter system, are complex. So you spend all of your time going to meetings, if you're applying for certain of the public benefits that you have to apply for, you have to deal with all of those meetings. You have to go to this meeting, you have to go to that meeting. By the time you're done with all of the meetings that you're required to do, to keep your kids going and keep yourself in the shelter system, when do you have the time to get yourself back to stability? So we'd like to provide a service with people, help them understand how to untangle those issues and get to the next step. And I just want to say that the data found by the Community Speak project, it really aligns with our experience. We do see a lot of the challenges in our Bronx community, as was brought up, and COVID-19. Part of the reason why it hit the Bronx so hard is because our community. So we had looked at, prior to the pandemic, the area that we serve, and just before the pandemic started, there was only a 4.4% unemployment rate in the Bronx, but it had, but 48% of the children in our community lived below the poverty line. And so even with that best ever unemployment rate, there's still a disconnect. There's still a level of income that's not there, and it's really impacting the children in our community. And so once either the unemployment rate went up to 25% over the course of several months, and stayed that way for quite a while, you can see how that would really impact people's lives and really made people have hard choices between eating or not and being able to make rent or not. And so, I really identify with what the data found, and it's something that we see and we continue to see. In fact, in the last quarter, we served more meals than we served in the entire year of 2018.
Wow.
So that was from, I'm talking about January through March of 2022. So, our community faces a longer lag time in getting back on their feet. I came to POTS right after, in 2012. So not right after the Great Recession, but shortly afterwards. And we didn't see a full recovery until about 2018 or 2019 in the Bronx. So that was more, it was 10 years. And so without proper policy solutions, you're going to see a very similar situation happening with the pandemic, is my guess, that you have this extra lag time where everybody else in the country feels like, oh, we're done, the recession's over. Whereas we're seeing that that's not going to be the case in communities that have the greatest challenges.
Thank you. It's, I guess I'm glad that the data is accurate and I'm upset that the data is accurate at the same time. When we saw those numbers for the Bronx, my eyes literally popped out of my head. I made them run the data several times because it just seemed so far out, even relative to everything else, which didn't look very good in other neighborhoods in the city. But the work you're doing is so critically important, and I think the connection between all of these insecurities and childcare is the availability of childcare turns out to be something that now the city hopefully can focus on and work with organizations like we have up here to ensure that the resources get to the families that need it. This is what I'm most worried about in terms of what's going to happen next, which brings me to Mayor Michael Nutter. He wasn't mayor of New York. We forgive him for that because we could have used him, frankly. I won't say when. And, but, there are a lot of similarities between New York and Philadelphia. Plus, you do teach urban politics and policy more broadly and have been continuing to do very important work around policy in this area. And you've also written about the importance of using data in policy making, but at the same time, understanding people, communities, neighborhoods, and what Francis said so correctly, that policy is only the beginning, that we have to focus on implementation as well. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how you see data being used in solving these problems. Sure. And I'm going to ask you the hard question, but I'm going to ask everybody else that question, but you have a chance, all of you, to think about this is, what should the mayor of New York City be doing now? How should he be using the findings of surveys like Community Speak to address the city's post-COVID problems, especially childcare and the cascading negative impacts now that have happened as a result of the failure to support the childcare system in this city?
Yeah. Esther, thank you, and certainly Communities Speak, um, the entire group. This is one of the most exciting things that I've had an opportunity to be involved with here at Columbia. And it's also, as you were reading out the names, half of the Community Speaks folks are in my class. So I find that exciting as well. And I'm really, really proud of the students. The leadership is the leadership, and always important. But the folks who are doing the day-to-day work, and to have our students so actively engaged in this work, it just makes me so excited. To my fellow panelists, I was listening to everybody's stories, and I think it may have been Christina talking about all this great work and organizations that were built up in the 80s. I feel slightly inadequate. I mean, I was working in a discotheque in the 80s. I was not building organizations, but I got to it as soon as I could. In her introduction, Esther talked about, that I'd spent 15 years on city council. I said to Christina, when she said it, it sounded like a sentence. I did 10 to 15 on city council. But it informed a lot of my work and that experience. But, I'd go back even farther, quite honestly. I mean, I continue, I guess, to be the collection of my life experiences. And so growing up in the 70s in West Philadelphia, we were the third Black family on the block. By the time I was 10, there were 3 white families left. None of our parents went to college. So when Jeff was talking about college, and their whole focus, their dream, their desire was for all of us to go to school, go to college. And the fact of the matter is, and it's one of my early, I guess, political reckonings, the realization of how important it is who's in the White House. And so I went to college when first president I voted for was Jimmy Carter. And, I got like some financial aid to go to another school in Philadelphia, not Columbia.
We got your daughter. It's
Yeah,
okay.
no, definitely my money and my daughter came to Columbia. But, every year of the Carter administration, college financial aid went up. And by the way, every kid on my block who wanted to go to college actually went to college. Every kid in the mid-70s. And then we had a change in Washington. And I think it was Francis talked about the Reagan administration, and the massive cuts to financial aid plummeted Black and brown students, young people going to college. I mean, it was kind of the first time. I wasn't even thinking about politics, but I realized I saw that happen in real time. When I went to that other school, I was pre-med. I was a biomedical engineering major. It was a relatively new major. I wanted to be a doctor. First semester, freshman year chemistry changed the trajectory of my life. Ultimately, I think the world is a better and safer place as a result. It was very clear that I was not going to become a doctor. The reason I wanted to be a doctor is because I wanted to help people. While working in the nightclub, actually, I met a bunch of political people. So I worked in the first Black-owned discotheque in Philadelphia. And so the entire Black political community and others came to this club when I was 19 years old. And so I watched the reiteration, the second rise of Black political empowerment literally was taking place in this club while I was a sophomore, junior, and senior in college. And that's where I met all these people in real time, stars and soon to be stars. Fast forward, that led to volunteering with a city council person, working on a campaign. 1983, first Black mayor of Philadelphia. Chicago, first Black mayor in Chicago. Wilson Goode in Philly. Harold Washington in Chicago. And so it changed and shaped, that really did change the direction of my life. And that's how I got involved in politics. But it was actually from working in a nightclub. But I grew up in an environment where people actually cared about everybody's kids on the block. I mean, it was a time when literally any adult could tell any child, stop doing that, go over here, do this, do that, do the other thing. And I'm not saying it was perfect. It was gang war activity and, 50, 60 kids were killed a year in gang war activity, but it was community. And so when I was in city council, 14 and a half years, but when I became mayor, it's not always trying to go backwards. I wanted to bring the values of that childhood experience that every kid should be able to go, at least have a higher education experience, that communities had to be safe. That, I grew up at Sherwood Recreation Center, subsequently renamed Christie. I went to Black Oak Park, subsequently named Malcolm X Park, that there were parks and recreation services and people could walk down the street. And so when I came into office, we used data to make decisions about public safety. We used data to make decisions around public education. I wasn't technically in charge of public education because the state had taken over the Philadelphia school system in the early 2000s. But what I said was, if I'm responsible for picking up the trash of these children's parents, then I should have some say in the quality of education they receive. And so it didn't matter, what the law said from my perspective. I'm the mayor of this town. These are my children, and I want to make sure they get a high quality education, reading at grade level in third grade, having opportunities to graduate from high school and go on to some post-secondary educational opportunity, college, 4-year, 2-year, career and technical education program, or whatever the case may be. And so we used data to drive the budget. The budget is more than numbers and words on a sheet of paper. It is a statement of values. You only have so much money, and you have to spend it wisely. And Philadelphia, unfortunately, we have so many firsts, which I love talking about in New York, but I won't insult you. But we also have the highest poverty rate of the 10 largest cities in the United States of America. The highest. And it's been over 20% for 40 years. And so it is deep poverty. It is ingrained poverty. It is the stranglehold on people's lives. Grandmom's in poverty, mom's in poverty, their child is in poverty, and the next kid will probably be in poverty. Right? So, and that's about jobs, it's about educational opportunity, it's about incarceration, it's about reentry, it's about economic development, it's all of those things. And you have to do all those things when you have that kind of position. And so if you're not using data, then you're using anecdotes. Now, anecdotes are bits and pieces of data, but you can't drive policy on anecdotes. The first thing we did, and one of the first big examples, I know we're talking about children and families, but we're also talking about public safety of those children and families, is when we found that 65% of the homicides in the city were concentrated in 9 of the 23 police districts. Well, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes or a rocket scientist to figure out that maybe we need to rebalance and reallocate and redeploy our public safety officers. I've taken police officers out of my lexicon. They're public safety officers. Policing is something that's done to you. Public safety is something that's done for you. And so we rebalanced and redeployed. We had 53% of our students were graduating from high school in 4 years. I said I wanted an 80% high school graduation rate, because if you get that kind of critical mass, you can actually drive it above 80, into the late 80s, into the early 90s. As a part of an economic development strategy, because when more people are highly educated or have some post-secondary educational opportunity, people who are working have less active engagement in criminality. They don't have time, they're busy, they're working. And they're not trying to get somebody else's stuff. And so we tried to take a holistic approach that Everybody had a role in public safety. Everyone had a role and responsibility for children. And every department and agency had to have a plan for what they were doing to improve the quality of life in the city of Philadelphia. That if overgrown trees are blocking light and creating a dangerous condition, you just involve 3 different departments, but you actually only expect the police department to do something about that. That's actually Parks and Recreation, the park system has to deal with that tree. The buildings department has to deal with that abandoned house. Another department has to deal with the abandoned car. And somebody's got to clean up all those lots. You can find, there's a Wharton study that indicates that cleaning up vacant lots and debris actually creates safer environments in communities, right? So, I mean, you just, sometimes some people make a mistake. They're singularly trying to attack these issues. These are comprehensive issues that are in community. And if you talk to people in community speak, right, you will find more innovative ideas and programs than will ever emanate from within the government. Now, we like to think that we're pretty smart, right? But people who live in these communities, they actually know what's going on a day-to-day basis. And if we would actually listen to them and give them the opportunity to speak, use the resources that we have well, and you put those pieces together, you could actually make movement. You could move the needle in a significant way. It takes time. It takes politics. It takes effort. It takes commitment. It takes winning. It takes losing. All of those things will happen. And if you stick around long enough and worry less about who's getting the credit and worry more about results, you will actually get some things done and you will be successful. There are things that I did. There are things that my good colleague, Mark Funkhauser, when he was mayor, there are things that I'm sure Mayor Mike did here in New York that people have no idea what we did. We will get zero credit for it, but it will have improved the lives of other people. And if you're really focused on public service and not your own personal interests, you will think about making your investments in those ways. Somebody somewhere will remember that you did that thing, or you can just remind yourself, right? So, and move on with it. And so, you know, the pandemic, I mean, look, you'd have to be like 105 years old to have experienced anything near what we've been going through, right? If you were alive in 1918, then, you know, God bless you, right? I was a mayor during the Great Recession, right? We didn't issue stay-at-home orders. We didn't make businesses close. We didn't send people home, right? It's a worldwide economic crisis. The health crisis, which was the right solution, sending people home, but created an economic crisis because nobody's working, right? So what happened in what I call the 13 months of 2020? A worldwide pandemic, deep fiscal distress, racial reckoning and the murder of George Floyd, a crazy ass presidential election, and the 13th month of 2020, we had an insurrection. Any one of those things would have been enough to send people into a tailspin. We had all 5 in 13 months. Kids who are behind before the pandemic are going to be way behind as a result. K-12 education system was not ready for remote learning. I mean, whether you liked it or not, I mean, we kind of figured it out, I guess, in about a week on the college and university level. In Philadelphia, when they sent the kids home and started to try to do remote learning, they suddenly realized, which was not a revelation, that not everyone has the internet at home. And for some who do, they also realized some of them didn't have a computer. And so they actually issued an order that all learning, all teaching had to stop. Because if we can't teach everybody, we're not teaching anybody. And then bought 50,000 Chromebooks. And then there was a dispute and a fight, of course, about how they were going to get distributed and who was going to distribute them because nobody wanted to go outside. But eventually the kids did get them. And then they started teaching again. This is the insanity of many of the systems that we are experiencing today. And so if you think that kids were having a tough time in 2019, it's going to go on for a while. The after effect. We haven't even begun to talk about the mental health issues of being away from their friends, away from their teachers, scared to go outside, scared somebody's going to do something or something's going to happen or they're going to get sick. Their parents have died, their grandparents have died, or other family members, in addition to the explosion of violence all across the United States of America, not solely driven by the pandemic, notwithstanding some of the spin on that. So, I mean, I don't want to end on that note. So, you know, what leaders have to do, especially at the local level, is work with the folks here who actually created organizations, Gretchen's here, ABC, a number of others, bring in the corporate community, bring in the foundation community. Again, Ryan, thank you, and Mayor and Patty and Jim. This is an all hands on deck moment. And it's actually not really a moment. This is going to be with us for a while. And so local leaders have an incredible opportunity to demonstrate not just leadership, but community and partnership. And all of that starts with listening to folks who are on the ground doing the work and having these experiences. There are times, probably usually late at night, probably sometimes when maybe I've had something beyond water, that, you know, I think about, you know, I'd love to get back in the game. I'd love to be down there taking on these challenges. I mean, you literally kind of run the danger. Fortunately, I fall asleep. And when I wake up in the morning, those thoughts have completely gone away. It's a tough time to be in public service right now, but I do other things now. So thank you, Esther.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Nutter. I really want to push everybody now, and I'm going to get back to you on this, Mayor Nutter, but I'm going to ask Jeff to kick this off, which is, okay, here we are. And you've all convinced me it's the worst situation we could possibly be in now, especially for families with children. But new money is coming in. And it's
Already
coming
coming.
into New York for sure, and other cities as well. Some states are actually stepping up and putting money in. And we've got $5 billion coming into to New York City very shortly from the state budget for childcare, for services related to children and families. So, you know, I'd love you to start us off on this, Jeff, about what has to be done. I don't want to say first because, you know, I like Lyndon Johnson. We can chew gum and walk at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So
to me, there's a couple of things that we would start right away with the data. There are some places, we've talked about the Bronx, that the need is so significantly higher than other places that and it's not simply just putting money in those places. You've got to build an infrastructure that allows those places to have high quality childcare. The worst thing we could do is give folks lousy childcare because we just threw something together at the last moment because we had money. So to me, I'm starting with the data. I'm then going to solve the problem. There are several major problems. We mentioned them in community speak. One is facilities. We run an early childhood facility. It is really a complicated sort of regulations to have a facility that has very young children in it.
Right.
And most not-for-profits don't have the kind of resources to fit out and build out what's necessary to really have a quality childcare system. So that's one issue. The second issue is talent.
Right.
When you look around the country, this is not New York, teachers are leaving teaching. But the numbers of folks leaving early childhood is unbelievable right now. Why? You can make more working at Amazon, working at Burger King than you can make working in the early childhood center. We've got to change that. And we can't get caught in this fiscal cliff dilemma, right? Which says, we're getting all this money now, 4 years from now, the money's going to be gone. So we don't want to invest it in ways that we're going to have to pay for it later, right? We got a crisis. Let's use the money to fix the crisis. We got 4 years to figure out where we're going to get the money from later. Let's take care of the issue right now, because we can't have a situation where poor people, and particularly poor women, are not able to go to work And if they do go, they're terrified that their child is somewhere unsafe, where they're not learning anything and they're falling further and further behind. That's a problem we can begin to solve right now. The last part of this, I think, is education for workers. We have to prepare the next generation of childcare workers with a set of skills that match what our knowledge has developed over the course of the last 10 years when it comes to early childhood, so that we make sure we have a labor force that's really prepared to deliver the high quality that poor children need. You know, people come to look at my early childhood center, wealthy people, they all say, oh, this is better than my own kids. And I'm thinking, it's gotta be better. Look at what your kid has, right? They have all these resources, money, they don't have to worry about anything. My kids have nothing. They need a great childcare center, and we've got to make sure in the poorest communities that they get the best of both the talent as well as the facilities necessary to sort of begin to try to provide the supports these young people are going to need and their families going to need.
Esther, can I comment on one thing?
Yes,
on
I
what you
just
said?
want to remind everybody to fill out the cards on your seat if you have questions. Oh, you do have the cards. Oh, they're not on your seat, but
yeah.
you will get a card.
One
Okay.
one of the things,
Go ahead.
I mean, that has truly amazed me. I mean, you know, I even at my age, I still get surprised by stuff that people do or don't do. I mean, if over the last few years, we have not figured out the incredible value of teachers and childcare workers and a number of others who specifically work with children. We haven't even gotten to first responders and people in the medical community and the like. And in some instances, I mean, as I think Jeff touched on, I mean, the salaries that some folks are making, I mean, they literally can't raise their own family. And so why there's not a serious discussion about accelerating or significantly increasing not just the wages, I mean, just the overall salaries of teachers and folks who work with children. I mean, you would think adults, I mean, you would think parents with kids, after somehow trying to figure out how they were going to work at home on this, like I call it, the Zoom machine, and try to educate their kids at the same time, that I know literally drove some people crazy. Why they wouldn't be running out of their house saying, please, please give them some more money so I get my kid in school and not be driven crazy. You know, teaching kids is hard. Running a school system, I have always said, running a school system is so much harder than running a city. It's not like picking up the trash. It's not like dealing with public safety. It's not filling potholes. You're talking about, depending on what school, 20, 25, 30 individual children who show up with 30 different situations, levels of learning, numbers, colors, all the other stuff kids are supposed to know in one classroom. And we want that person up at the front of the room to take care of all 30 of those students and turn them all into geniuses. It's just, I mean, it's great. It's insane. It's really crazy. So.
Francis, I'm going to ask you to jump in here about what you're thinking needs to be done now.
Lots of thoughts, and certainly just in terms of what the mayor just talked about, I think, you know, we're in a moment where we really need to be thinking about mindset and values. What do we value in our society? What do we value when we talk about our children? What do we value when we talk about communities that are thriving, where children, families can thrive, just not survive? You know, I think if the pandemic has shown us anything, and all of what has happened since, is really, you know, the lack of a moral compass. And that's why we cannot continue to really go ahead and continue to rely on the systems. And as we saw in the pandemic, the government, to really create the kind of care, the kind of compassion, and the kind of responsibility in terms of taking care of our children and our families. It was in communities where communities came together, community-based organizations came together. In our community, we coordinated 30 organizations and agencies that we worked with, formed relationships with, strategies with, to really be able to serve our families and our children during the pandemic. Mutual aids, that taught us something, that said something to us. And when money comes into our communities, it's not just about funding, it's about investment. Investment in what Jeff talked about, infrastructure, an infrastructure that is about the community organizations that are, and the community workers that are the front line. But also it is the infrastructure for real, equitable, just, sustainable development. And the investment has to be in just not only teachers, but leaders in a community that are driven by vocation. By vocation. Teaching is a vocation. Talk to any teacher, and you will come away understanding that they are driven by vocation. And that should be honored, and that should be compensated. Community-based organizations need to be invested in so that they cannot just survive, but thrive, so that we can continue to expand not only our services, but also our reach and our impact in terms of empowering people within the community to really be able to lead the change and sustain the change. And that the money that comes in needs to be monitored by the people in community. What we found out in the pandemic, and certainly in terms of the amazing work that community-based organizations were doing with community themselves, people who were in communities who were hurting, came out of their houses and helped each other. Is that that's what we should be investing in, but there is leadership in communities that needs to be invested in. And so as this money comes in, I think there needs to be clearly a way, and if we're talking about what the report really spoke to, it's just not about finding spaces and opening up childcare centers. It's really community assessments and mapping in that community as to where those centers need to be, and investment in community leaders to open those centers, run those centers, and staff those centers. And funding that will allow for not just a livable wage, but an honorable wage for those that work, the teachers, the childcare workers. And I think that that's what we really need to be focused on. And I think that's what this survey talks about, and this report talks to. But I think it's a change of mindset in terms of just not funding, policies that generate funding, but that policies that are really looking at systemic inequities and really investing in systemic change. So that's what I would.
Thank you. Christina, could you sort of address the same question about what the city should be doing?
Yes. So, we see that all of these challenges, much like everybody else has been saying, are complex and interconnected with various different things. And childcare is an incredibly important thing we see in our community. Many people want access to it. They often have difficulty getting it. The way the voucher systems are set up are so complex that it's often, even if you're eligible, getting them to approve them is incredibly hard. And having the understanding and the access to figuring out how is it that I go about these things? What are the complex alphabet soups of programs that exist? So helping people part of it is just about making it simpler, and community organizations play a role in that. That's something that we do a lot of. We help people come to us and they say, we have a challenge, and we say, oh, here's your solution. And we can do some of that. We do a lot of that, but also just from a public policy perspective, thinking about the simplicity. And then it's a little bit of a different angle, but in our community, one of the things that we see is just the biggest challenge is the simple unaffordability of housing and how that trickles down and impacts in so many different ways. Sort of the constant fear of homelessness that parents have when they, can't make rent. And I think the last number of years of the pandemic have been a real challenge. And the other area that we see, because we serve mostly a Hispanic population, about, over 50% of our clients speak only Spanish with us in our community, in the programs that we offer, just the impacts of the pandemic on education in those families, how much more challenging it was. It wasn't just not having a device. It was not having the language skills to understand. If you have a kindergartner and you're the one who is getting them into their Zoom class, they don't know how to do it, right?
Not yet.
Being able to have the parents have the resources and the ability to address those challenges, and understanding that there are additional barriers in a city that's as international as New York City, not just Spanish, so many different communities that we represent in the city, and being able to help children get access that way.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions now. I have a couple of more questions I can be asking, but I know you've all been here patiently. There are people here I know who would have interesting things to say and ask. So if you could just raise your hand, I am happy to call on you and see if there's any questions, or I might just call on some people by name. Yes. Just introduce yourself, please. And a community partner.
I guess the curious question that I have, as someone given that we don't, what's
Why don't we give everybody a chance to respond to that? That's a really important question. If you don't mind, Jeff, I'm going to start with you again.
I'll start, and I think it's a great question. In the middle of the pandemic here in New York, when the hospitals were just totally overwhelmed, a couple of the teaching colleges said to sort of folks in their last year of medical school, no tests, no finals, go serve. You serve, you're going to graduate with your degree, because they were saying in a time of crisis, getting involved in saving lives is the most important thing you can do. I was thinking, why aren't our social work schools doing the same thing? Why aren't we just flooding the communities with folks who are there to help? Just to have somebody that young people and their families can talk to. That to me is just the beginning of this. We know a lot more about toxic stress now than we used to. We know that people are going to be paying this penalty for years. Some folks are going to have much shorter lives because of it. So to me, it's a starting place. We have a supply and demand challenge right now. I don't know any child that does not need some additional support. I don't know any kid who's going through this, where simply breathing is dangerous. And you're worried about killing folks through your breath, and you're 9. I have kids who left school in the 7th grade, and they're coming back to school in the 9th grade. I mean, and they had no contact. We know the difference between a 7th grader and a 9th grader. That maturation did not happen in any way we've ever seen before. So I think we've got this huge crisis. I think we've got to be creative and innovative about how we solve some of these issues. And I think we don't have the luxury of time. Sometimes you can think things through for 2 or 3 years. We don't have 2 or 3 years.
No.
We need to start working on this right now. And I think that that's one of the areas I would say that we just really need to be innovative. And we need to make sure that we get our kids and our families the kind of support that they're going to need to begin to try and put their lives back together. So that doesn't touch the academic part, but I think I'm going to start with the social emotional part.
Yeah. Francis, you want to pick up on that question?
Bold idea. You know, I think one of the things that certainly the report indicated, and I think that we've been talking about, is that what's happening right now is not departmentalized, right? The causes, the root causes of what's happening now really have to be looked at and really have to be understood through a holistic lens, right? And I think that, you know, one of the things that I think is, and I've been saying it, I mean, that we should be investing in is really how and in which way we create the context for the kind of indicators of what does it mean to be, to live, have well-being in communities. There needs to be an indicator. That's a kind of a bold idea, right?
Yes.
And it really, you know, and those indicators need to include affordable housing,
Right.
need to include quality healthcare, need to include environments that promote healing, looking at, you know, open space, looking at toxic air, right? Looking at the quality of schools, right? I think those are the kinds of indicators, and an investment, a bold idea would be creating a metric that really looks at that community by community. And then saying, okay, what we need to be doing, if in fact, and I'll just use gentrification and, you know, development, enough. We live in, you know, what we call ground zero of what you don't want to have happen in Williamsburg to a community, right? Enough with this development, enough development. It is maxed out, and everything after that then needs to address the root cause, and that's affordable housing. And so I offer that out as a bold idea in terms of how and in which way, if this mayor is really about what he says he's about, and he's really about community, and he's really about equity, I think you have to really be able to kind of measure where and how that, where communities, and particularly communities of color, historically disenfranchised communities, really lie in what we can create as a standard of what well-being in communities. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, both of these are extremely powerful ideas, actually. And I'm going to ask Christina to pick it up, see what she has to say.
I'm not a knowledgeable policy person, I would say, but you know, one of the things that I noticed that happened during the pandemic that was extremely positive was that there was suddenly an absence of blame on people for having bad situations. Ordinarily, you know, when you try and talk about just handing out cash or providing services, I've had opportunities to go to schools and talk about it, and there's, well, are there people trying to game the system? Are they trying to game you? Because we don't do a lot of verification of income and things like that. And we get questions like that pretty regularly. I mean, I talk to an extraordinarily wide range of people about challenges of poverty and inequality in our city, and there's always a little grain there of blame for people for being poor. And it's something that's part of American society, I think, generally, and has been for a long time, for the duration of American society. And the absence of it meant that people could make these quick things. They could, you know, be like, oh, I need to help my neighbor. I need to do these mutual aid. I need to hand over funds. And, you know, as the pandemic ends, that idea of blame is kind of coming back. And so I think it's about, as a country, thinking about what it is that we value and why is it that we think that if someone's in a bad situation, they've done something wrong. I know it's not universally true, and I don't want to say, but it does permeate everything. And I think
Right.
it's kind of an intangible idea, but that's sort of my bold take on what needs to change to make it easier to help.
This is an important idea. There
Right.
was a book that I know Jeff Canada knows very well, written by William Joyce Wilson, called The Truly Disadvantaged. And that concept that you're talking about, it changes people's attitudes. If they believe somebody's truly disadvantaged, while we're willing to put the resources in to assist them. But if we blame them, as you said, for their own situation, well, there's no role for the public sector or even for community for that matter, in some sense. So changing that way of thinking, I think, is fundamental to getting to a place where we can support high needs communities. I
Right.
think that's fundamental.
Yeah.
I want to ask Mayor Nutter to
Um,
have the
Yeah,
final word
gonna,
on
I'm
this.
going to be brief. So that narrative change, I think, is critically important. Christina talked about, poor people don't want to be poor. No one wants to be poor, right? I mean, no one wants that, right? But people are in different situations, and you have, some folks who, I was able to do it, so you should be able to do it too. Well, okay. I mean, it's interesting. Let's see where you started, and let's see where some other folks started. And if you didn't start at the same place, then some people are always going to be behind. I mean, like, come on, right? So your parents bought a house, pass it on to you, and that generational wealth goes there. I mean, we know some of these stats about the differences. I mean, just from a pure black-white perspective in terms of generational wealth. If you didn't have the benefit of a series of various programs, if you were not even able to take advantage of the GI Bill to get that house in the 50s, to pass on to your kids in the 80s, I mean, you started behind already. It's not that you didn't apply for the GI Bill, it's that it wasn't available to you or you were denied. So I love the idea that Francis laid out. I mean, KPIs, I'm sure all the business school students love talking about key performance indicators. I mean, that's how businesses decide where they're going to make investments. And so, I don't generally give mayors advice in public, but, in a theoretical way, right? I mean, developing a set of KPIs for this city or any other city, publishing them, this is what, these are the indicators of a healthy community, right? And then hold yourself accountable on a yearly basis to what those are. And I can guarantee you're going to fall short on some of them, and you're going to do well on some others, and you'll be kind of hanging out on that third group. But that's how you drive an agenda, is that these are our goals, these are our values, this is what we're trying to get done. It will not happen next year. President Kennedy, of course, is famous for the, first 100 days, but if you look at the rest of that statement, he said, it might not be 1,000 days. It may be, it might not happen in my time, but you at least are trying to drive somewhere and holding people accountable. And if something does not work, stop doing it. Stop funding it. I mean, there are people in Philadelphia still mad with me today because when the economic crisis hit and I said, come on in, tell us about your program. How many people are you serving? 25, but we're doing citywide. And how long have you been getting funded? The last 20 years. Well, I'm really sorry. But there's an economic crisis. I cannot afford your nostalgia. I am not funding this program anymore. You can be pissed with me, but in a crisis environment, we're only doing stuff that actually works. And if I see some of those folks on the street, they will literally either walk past or go on the other side. I'm okay. I got my friends, right? I'm not looking for any new friends, right? I got what I got, right? But you can't keep doing the same old stuff. You're gonna get the same old results. So anyway, I'm old. I just say
Thank
whatever.
you. Thank you. I just want to thank our panelists. It's been an extraordinary evening. Great way to renew this space with incredible ideas. And
Haven't been up here in a while.
despite the difficulties that we're all facing, a tremendous amount of optimism. But I'm going to ask Mayor Funkhauser to speak before we wrap up because I can't resist.
Exactly.
I think that, this policy goal, y'all want to think about, but there's a lot of good ideas.
Mhm. I couldn't agree with you more about implementation. And we don't teach it well here, frankly. And frankly, I didn't learn anything about implementation until I went to City Hall. And then I realized, I knew budgets, I knew politics, I knew policy, but I didn't really know implementation. So that's what I learned, and that's what I teach in class now. Sarah Holloway teaches it because she's actually created things and implemented, but it is a failure in our public policy schools, I believe. And the students here will do better. I want to end on that note. The students
They
here will
will.
definitely do better. Ashley is
You're
looking,
being told something,
telling me something, but I have no idea what.
Kelsey.
Kelsey is now going to make the final announcement of the evening, which I almost forgot. I apologize, but this is extremely important, and then we will call it a wrap. There's food in the back. You've all been an amazing audience, staying for the whole evening, but really, I just want to thank the panel now first.
All right, thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. I just want to announce our current survey, which launched on Friday last week, on April 15th. It's going to be open through the end of May. So this is a biannual survey that we use to create briefs like this. That's open 6 weeks with each iteration. The survey is available in English, French, Spanish, Chinese, and Standard Arabic. As you can see from our panel tonight, this project is done in partnership with local community partners, many of which are here in the room with us today, who we work with to help us reach the voices of all New Yorkers, particularly those who are in high needs communities who are often underrepresented in surveys like this. So you can pull up the survey right now using this QR code. It takes about 10 minutes to complete, so you have it up on your phone. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to stop myself or any of my colleagues who are here tonight. We all have these nice blue buttons. That's how you can identify us. We're happy to answer any questions. So again, thank you all for coming. We'd love for you to stay and continue this conversation that our fantastic panelists started for us. We have some wine and refreshments in the back, including some that are kosher for Passover that are available to you. So again, thank you so much this evening. We look forward to chatting with you.
Thanks, everyone.